Hello, dear friends, and welcome to Kardec Radio, where we nourish our souls 24/7. Kardec Radio is dedicated to bringing Spiritism to all of us and all its beautiful inner transformational teachings. And today we will continue in our study of Genesis. Genesis chapter 18. It's entitled, The Time Has Come. And we are today focusing on the end of this chapter, which is items 20 to 35. So we will be finishing the subtitle of the chapter, The Time Has Come, entitled Signs of the Times. And then we will be discussing the new generation. So we have a big program, and I'm saying a big hello to everyone who is joining us. And let us share our screen here so that everyone can follow along. Let us see here. We're going to do a little test just to make sure that it shows up well. So please bear with me for a moment. Just to make sure. Okay. It looks to be in order. Just a minute here. Yes. All right. We're happy. We can continue. Hello, friends. I will be saying hello to everyone later because right now I can't see the comments. So Genesis, Allan Kardec, chapter 18, items 20 through 35. So the first sentence that you see here on this PowerPoint ties us into what we studied last week. And there we learned that the moral progress is aided, our moral progress is aided by intelligence, by our education, by boosting our intelligence. And our moral progress are both equally important. So doing our inner transformational work and boosting our intelligence, our knowledge, are the two wings of the same bird that will help us ascend to God. So our moral progress, aided by our intelligence, will join us together in one and the same belief, which is founded on inarguable eternal truth, which will be acceptable to all. So Allan Kardec is pointing out to us that it will take time, that it will take our effort, namely our moral progress. And it will come out of our moral progress, coupled with our increased intelligence, that we will be joining forces in one and the same belief. And these beliefs will be founded on inarguable eternal truths. And they are, according to him, 1, God, 2, the existence of the soul, 3, the existence of the future, 4, the ongoing progress of individuals, and 5, the perpetuity of relationships among them, among the individuals. So this will give rise to us for us joining together without any conflict any longer. So are we resorting to dueling in order to force others to believe what we're believing? No. We know that in the Spirit's book, dueling is explained by the spirits on high, and it's called an archaic form. And we're still at times prone to dueling, but we don't do it with the gun out in the backyard. We do it with our minds. So we can rest in peace. It will happen. And in the meantime, it will help us to focus on what we have in common with our brothers and sisters. And Allan Kardec helps us by focusing or pointing us towards inarguable eternal truths. They will bring us together. Just like charity. There is no salvation without charity. Charity is something we can all practice. It brings us together. However, if we say there's no charity without the church, then we start fighting, because then there's this church, that church, or the other. So now, item 20, Alan Kardec continues to say, such a state of affairs, namely, once we've reached this unity, presupposes a radical change in the sentiment of the masses, a generalized progress that cannot be accomplished except by quitting the circle of the narrow and petty ideas that foster selfishness. So now he flashes it out and adds that we need to release selfishness, that we cannot focus on petty ideas, narrow and petty ideas, because when it comes to narrow and petty ideas, we all have them and they drive us apart. But by focusing on the inarguable eternal truths, we come together. It's so beautiful. It's an amazing opportunity we have. The generation that disappears will take its errors and prejudices with it, he says. The generation that emerges, let's move this on, the generation that emerges, immersed in a purer source and imbued with more sound ideas, will imprint on the world an ascendant movement in the sense of moral progress, which will signal the new phase for humankind. So the old generation will disappear, and they will take with them the errors and prejudices that were part of that generation. And emerging will be a pure generation, and that will imprint on the world an ascension of moral progress. And those are the signs of the new phase for humankind. And we can see it already in many of the new generation's children or young people. We can see that there is a very different impetus they're bringing with them. So now we're moving on to item 21. This phase is already being revealed by unmistakable signs. We have seen the founding of greater number of protective, civilizing, and liberating institutions under the impetus and by the initiative of individuals obviously predestined for the work of regeneration. We know that our planet is in the process of ascending to a world of regeneration. And here Alan Kardec is pointing out that, and we're talking 150, 160 years ago, right? We have to keep that in mind, even though it seems so current, and it is so current, that this new phase is already showing its signs. And these signs are by the great number of protective, civilizing, and liberating institutions under the impetus and by the initiative on individuals, obviously predestined for the work of regeneration. This we can see that penal laws are imbued every day with a more humane sentiment. So this is one example. The other one is the founding of protective, civilizing, liberating institutions. The other one is that the penal laws are becoming more humane. Race prejudices are weakening, and peoples have begun to regard themselves as members of a great family, as Jesus has modeled to us on the cross. The importance of the universal family. Here, Alan Kardec is seeing signs 150, 160 years ago of that to happen, and we can see it too. Race prejudices. Then he says, and through the uniformity and ease of the means of transaction, they're overcoming the barriers that have separated them. From all parts of the world, they are coming together in universal assemblies for the peaceful exchange of thoughts. So this is pointing towards the future, and some of it has been manifested. We have the founding of protective, civilizing, and liberating institutions, and we have them. We have a penal law that has become more humane compared to 4 or 5, even just 100 years ago. We have less race prejudices. They're weakening. We're working on it. We're still in progress. In process, people's recognition of the universal family is being boosted. We're overcoming separating barriers. And just on the page before, we learned how to do it, namely by focusing on that which we have in common, and that are inarguably items that we have all in common, like God, like the existence of the soul, and so forth. And we have a worldwide universal peaceful assemblies to exchange thoughts. And furthermore, we have an instinctive rejection against materialistic ideas. And this he explains in item 22. And he says another sign is the instinctive rejection that's manifesting against materialistic ideas. So this begs a therapeutic question, doesn't it? Where are we at as far as our materialistic ideas? Are we clinging to matter, including our own bodies? Are we still very much focused on just anything that we can touch, see, feel, and smell? Or do we have the increasing capacity to treat people with illnesses of the soul just as kind and gentle and with just as much understanding and tolerance as anyone who is injured in the body? So let us meditate on that, dear friends. Where are we at? We learned in Between Heaven and Hell that it is vital for us to work on dematerializing ourselves and our lives. Because why? Because it also helps us with our transition into the spirit world. All right, let us move on. We're going to item 23. Believing that most people are imbued with such sentiments, one can easily imagine the changes that would occur in social relations. Charity, fraternity, and benevolence towards all, and tolerance for all beliefs will be their motto. So Allan Kardec is explaining the social relations of the new generation. Let us go back to the previous ones. He says, here are the signs, and we looked at them, right? Penal laws, the race prejudices, people's recognition of the universal family, and the whole list. And then he says that the new generation will display more charity, fraternity, benevolence towards all, which is the first item in the definition of charity by the spirits on high in the Spirits book. Benevolence towards all. And tolerance for all beliefs will be their motto. Tolerance for all beliefs. Are we tolerant towards other people's truths, beliefs? Are we seeing the good in everything and everyone, and to what degree? Because of course we're not perfect, but to what degree are we focusing on becoming or being part of this new generation? Because we're here to aid the process of planet Earth to a world of regeneration, and of course our own individual transformation. Good questions, right? So this is the objective towards which humankind is obviously headed. And today more so, more urgently so, it seems like, than even 150 some years ago. Item 24. The new generation will thus march towards the fulfillment of all the humanitarian ideas, compatible with the degree of advancement at which it will have arrived. So the new generation, and this is also so great that we're studying this right now, because it will help us to direct ourselves, to align ourselves. Where do we want to place ourselves in this process? of transition? Do we want to be part of the new generation? Then here, Alan Kardec is pointing us exactly towards the maxims and the values of the new generation. So he says the new generation will thus march towards the fulfillment of all the humanitarian ideas, compatible with the degree of advancement at which it will have arrived. Of course, we can only be as humanitarian as we have worked on our inner transformation. We can't fake it, right? It goes hand in hand. With Spiritism going forward with the same goal and accomplishing its purposes, both will meet on the same ground. So the new generation and Spiritism will be working hand in hand with it. Spiritism is part of the progress. It was not Spiritism that created social renewal, Alan Kardec points out and makes clear to us. So it wasn't Spiritism that created the social renewal. It was the maturity of humankind that made such renewal a necessity. So this renewal was created by the maturity of humankind, by our collective moral progress. But Spiritism works hand in hand with the new generation due to what it is teaching and the values it's propagating. Through its moralizing power, its progressive tendencies, the breadth of its outlook, and the generality of the issues it encompasses, Spiritism is more capable than any other doctrine to aid the regenerative movement. This is why Spiritism is contemporaneous with it. So did we hear that? So Spiritism is more capable than any other doctrine, according to Alan Kardec, in being contemporaneous with this new generation. And it is through Spiritism's moralizing power, it is through Spiritism's progressive tendencies, it's through Spiritism's breadth of outlook and the generality of the issues it encompasses. And we can attest to that. Isn't it wonderful to be aligned with progress? Yes, it feels good. All right, now we're moving on to item 26. Now, dear friends, we're not reading every single word, so you are invited to go over this chapter and read it in its entirety. But we're picking out the highlights and we'll put it into this PowerPoint, hopefully helping with the understanding. So item 26. This tide is the generation. Okay, let's say, of course, the number of stragglers is quite large, but what can they do against the tide that is mounting except throw a few pebbles at it? So now Alan Kardec is pointing out, not everyone is aligned yet. So there's some stragglers, there's a number of stragglers, and actually that number is pretty large, according to him. But these stragglers have no power against the tide of the new. This tide is the generation that is now appearing, whereas the former are disappearing, the generation that is decaying every day in large strides. So the old is disappearing, they're discarnating, and the new is coming. Until then, however, they will defend their ground tooth and nail. So he's talking about the stragglers that have still the old moral values and beliefs. They will be fighting. There is a struggle because they don't want to give up. Because it is the decrepit past falling to pieces against the youthful future, of stagnation against progress, of the individual against God's will, because the time set by God has come. Let us remember the chapter is entitled, The Time Has Come. And we've talked about that a couple of weeks ago. So the time has come and the stragglers won't have a chance. But there will be a struggle and we're feeling it. We're feeling the struggle right now. But the decrepit past will be falling to pieces. So there's hope. So even 150 some years ago, Alan Kardec prophetically described what's going on right now. And not only now, but also now. So let us keep in mind, so we're on course. The struggle is not something to feel down and out about it. No, let us be hopeful and let us align ourselves with God's will. Let us be part of the progress. So now we're moving on to item 27. And this is entitled The New Generation. And now Alan Kardec spends a few pages on helping us understand the new generation and their impact. Those who practice evil for evil's sake and who are untouched by the sentiment of the good will no longer be worthy of the transformed planet. So everyone who likes to practice evil for evil's sake, evil, ignorance, right? Ignorance, who is untouched by the sentiment of the good, which is ignorance dash evil, will no longer be worthy of the transformed planet. And now he's explaining how that looks like. They will be banished from Earth because their stay would once more cause trouble and confusion and would be an obstacle to progress. So the ones who are still attached to evil will have to go. Again, we can rest in peace. They will, because God is overseeing all of this, and it is God's will who will expedite this. So they will have to disappear, those spirits. Some will expiate their hardness of heart on less evolved worlds. Others will do so among primitive races here on Earth, which will be the same as expiating on less evolved worlds. So now he's helping us to understand whoever isn't aligned with progress and the good will have to leave this planet, because those of us who are still there, attached to evil and liking to practice evil for evil's sake, would be causing trouble. And that is not allowed anymore. So what happens to those who will be leaving planet Earth? They will expiate their hardness of heart either on less evolved worlds, so they're not allowed to come back to planet Earth, or they will come back to Earth, but dwell among more primitive races on Earth. And they may not have spiritism then at their disposal. And we know that spiritism is aligned with progress, and that's why we're so grateful that this lifetime we are allowed to study and practice the Spiritist doctrine, which of course goes hand in hand with Jesus's maxims. So let us continue. So we have to leave planet Earth, or we will be reincarnated among more primitive races on Earth if we don't align ourselves with the good. According to the spirits, the Earth will not be transformed by a cataclysm that will suddenly wipe out an entire generation. So it won't be a physical event. But the current generation will disappear gradually, and the new one will follow it in the same way. So the more that will discarnate, the more that will, with the new impetus, will incarnate. Consequently, everything will proceed outwardly as usual, but with a single difference, a crucial one. A portion of the spirits who used to incarnate on the earth will no longer do so. Instead of a backward spirit inclined towards evil, and who would have incarnated in a child being born, there will be more advanced spirits with propensity for the good. So we won't necessarily see this change happening. This change towards the new souls coming in, being aligned with the good. But he says there will be one crucial difference, and that is that those souls that are troublemakers won't have the same power that they have now, because they either have to incarnate on another planet, or they will be among primitive races on the earth to learn their lessons for progress. All right. So the incarnating spirits inclined towards evil will be replaced by the spirits with propensity for the good, which is this new generation. So he's explaining that to us, what this new generation looks like and how they're coming in, how this transition is taking place. Item 28. The present age is one of transition. It is. The members of both generations are mixed together. So we're still mixed. We have both here on planet Earth, but we're working it through, shaking it up, right? These two generations hold ideas and views that are complete opposite. So at the present age, we are in the middle of this transition. And the members of both generations, the old and the new, are mixed together. And these generations hold complete opposite ideas. And I'm sure we're experiencing this right now. The bifurcation is so strong, and we're so invited to bridge the gap. As we started off today's talk, Alan Kardec showed us of how to do it, to not aggravate the divide, but to become peacemakers and focus on that which we have in common and which are inarguable truth. This is how we can be living the good through charity, tolerance, understanding. So by the nature of their moral dispositions, those two groups, the old and the new, but especially the intuitive and innate dispositions, it is easy to tell to which of the two each individual belongs. Charged with founding the age of moral progress, the new generation is distinguishable by an overall precocious intelligence and reason, combined with an innate sentiment of the good and spiritualist beliefs, an unmistakable sign of a certain degree of previous advancement. So what is the characteristic of the new generation? A precocious intelligence. How lovely. The ability to reason, an innate sentiment of the good, alignment with God's will, and spiritual beliefs, more attuned to that, less materialistic. On the other hand, what distinguishes less evolved spirits is primarily their rebelliousness against God, by refusing to acknowledge any power superior to human power, and the instinctive propensity for the degrading passions and the anti-fraternal sentiments of selfishness, pride, envy, and jealousy. In other words, their attachment to everything material, sensuality, ambition, and greed. So Alan Kardec, thank you, Alan Kardec, is crystal clear in distinguishing the new generation from the less evolved spirits from the old generation. So one aspect is rebelliousness against God, not recognizing that there is a power that's higher than us. The instinctive propensity towards degrading passions. What are degrading passions? Well, it's sensuality. It is food. It is violence. It is the emotional passions of anger, reactivity. Anything, it's drugs. Anything that is anchoring us in the more animalistic nature of us. Then there's the anti-fraternal sentiments of selfishness, pride, envy, jealousy. So this is hint, hint, all the things we need to observe ourselves in our nightly review to make sure that we're working on this inner transformation of ours so that we align ourselves with the new generation. And then the attachments to everything material. So the dematerialization of our lives. And he gives the examples of sensuality, ambition, and greed. All right. Moving on to item 29. By this emigration of spirits, one must not understand it to mean that all stragglers will be banished from the earth and relegated to less evolved worlds. We said that, or Alan Kardec said that already, because some will come back and incarnate among less evolved tribes or peoples. On the contrary, many will come back to earth because many have given in to the driving force of circumstances and examples. Their outer layer is worse than their core. Sometimes some people seem worse than their core is, so that's another variant. That's very nice to know. Once they're removed from the influence of matter and the prejudices of the corporeal world, most of them will see things much differently than when they were alive. We have seen many examples of this, which is a reminder for us as an aside to not surrender to judgment, which is one of those lower passions that some of us may carry. It's part of the old to judge others by their appearances, by their choices. Who are we to judge them and now categorize them as the new or the old? And this is a word of caution that we're not using these teachings now for our lower sentiments, by going out now saying, okay, this one is definitely a straggler. Oh, this one has potential to be the new generation. And we box people up. We don't know. It's not our job to judge our brothers and sisters. We're too busy to work on ourselves, aligning ourselves for the good, right? And to be of service in a non-judgmental way. So this is the invitation, because Alan Kardec showed us just one tiny aspect of what may go on behind the scenes, so to speak. And that is that some people may appear more of a straggler than they really are. And the minute they discarnate, they get it. So they may be much more advanced than we see them to be. So judgment, let's scratch that, right? Let's really scratch that. Let's really work on that. And remember that when we point one finger, three are pointing back at us. When we spot it, we've got it. All right, so once they were removed, we read this. They will be aided by benevolent spirits who take an inherent interest in them and who will hasten to enlighten and show them the erroneous path that they have followed. God's mercy will take care of all of us. And thank you, God, for being so good, for being such a tolerant God. So there is always help. We're never alone. It's beautiful. It really shows divine providence in action. All right, so we can, so here, the erroneous path they have followed. Through our prayers and exhortations, we ourselves can contribute to their improvement, because there is continuous unity between the dead and the living, and we know that. So here Alan Kardec points out to us, instead of judging and boxing people up, we're invited to be of support, to aid each and every single soul, maybe particularly the ones who appear to us to be more aligned with the so-called evil. Let us pray for them. Let us be a transformative force as much as we're capable of. Alan Kardec saying, through our prayers and exhortations, we can contribute to their improvement, but not make matters worse, which would, through judgment, which would be in alignment with the evil forces. So thank you for this guidance. Item 30, what's happening here? 29, okay. Item 30, whether the spirits of the new generation are new, more evolved spirits, or whether they are old spirits who have evolved, the result is the same. So what he's saying, whether the new generation it consists of more highly evolved spirits or spirits who were part of the old guard, so to speak, and have now learned new lessons and come back to Earth, the result is the same. The transition of planet Earth to a world of regeneration will be happening. And the new generation will have these different components of spirits, different types of spirits. From the moment they display better dispositions, there is always a renewal. And that's the goodness of God. And the moment we display better dispositions, we're part of there will be a renewal. Beautiful. Item 32. The great collective departures are not meant only to activate exits, but to transform the mind of the masses more rapidly by freeing it from evil influences and lending greater ascendancy to new ideas. So now Alan Kardec is pointing out that the great collective departures are not only happening to activate exits. So it's not just so that they can go. No, there's another meaning behind it. And that is the goal, to transform the mind of the masses more rapidly by freeing it from evil influences and lending greater ascendancy to new ideas. And how is that happening? A, by the older generational, less evolved spirits leaving planet Earth, disappearing because they will be messing up the broth, so to speak, kicking up dust. And now some of them may come back and help in the regeneration of the planet, because with new insights, and then the new generation, new spirits, more evolved spirits will come in as well. And that will help us to the greater ascendancy of new ideas. It is because many, in spite of their imperfections, are ripe for such a transformation, that many depart in order to retemper themselves in a pure source. So what he's implying here too, which we want to point out, is the great reason for so many departures of spirits right now, and the joy in knowing the bigger picture. It's for the good. It's aligned with God's wisdom. And we're invited to align our will with God's will. So who are we to resist the departure of the souls that's happening right now? So we're invited to align ourselves and see that it's for the greater good. Plus, we know from the Spirit's book and the Gospel, we know that actually it is harder for a spirit to start its incarnation than to be discarnated, because that's a homecoming, that's a release of the spirit from the physical bonds, which are often experienced as a form of imprisonment. And here on earth, part of our ignorance is that we mourn the loss of the loved ones of those who depart earth, and we celebrate the incarnation of a new spirit. But aren't both celebratory moments? One, because the spirit now has an opportunity to learn new lessons by freshly incarnating, and the one who is discarnating is now aiding planet Earth in its process of ascension, and him or herself in gaining new insights. Now let's see where we stopped. So that was 32. We're going to 33. The regeneration of humankind, therefore, does not absolutely require spirits to be completely renewed. A modification in their moral outlook is sufficient. So it is sufficient that we modify our moral outlook. So the regeneration of humankind does not hinge on the absolute complete renewal of every spirit, but a modification is already Great. So that's more good news, isn't it? This modification occurs in all those who are predisposed to it once they are removed from the pernicious influences of the world. So for many of us, it takes discarnation, because for us, this world has pernicious influences on us. And then once we're out of the flesh, we look back and we get it. Wow, why was I so ignorant, right? So this is the proposal, this is the invitation, this is the potential that Alan Kardec is pointing out. When isolated and individual, this improvement goes unnoticed. So the fact that souls discarnate and they get insights and they come back more wisely as a new incarnation goes generally unnoticed if it happens one by one, just like, the way we're used to. Quite different is the effect when it takes place simultaneously among large masses, because then, according to the proportions it assumes in one generation, the ideas of a people or a race can be profoundly modified. So we're reminded of the Second World War, for example, how many souls discarnated then. And it is in Nossalar where we learn in one section where one of the ministers on high explained that this was actually an opportunity for planet Earth to shift, for moral ascendancy to happen. And that was a discarnation in masses. And right now, albeit different, we're in a similar situation. There's a lot of people discarnating. And we're seeing here what happens behind the scenes. And that is for the good. So once again, we're invited to rewrite the script of seeing discarnation as this evil, horrific thing. But here we're getting the bigger picture. So the invitation of what's happening right now and what happened back then, and many other instances too, we're just mentioning these two, is the fact that mankind profoundly modified. The earth changed. That is what is almost always noticed after the large shocks that decimate populations. That many souls who need a boost in their moral transformation will go. And as we heard, they will either come back with new lessons learned and help aid in the process, or they will have to go to other worlds, less evolved worlds, or they're coming back and living among lesser evolved peoples on this planet. Destructive scourges destroy only bodies. They do not touch the spirit. So let us remember that. Destructive scourges, mass excarnation movements do not only destroy bodies, not the spirit, because the spirit is immortal. Maybe that will help us to align ourselves. They activate the coming and going movement between the corporeal and spirit worlds, and consequently the progressive movement of incarnate and discarnate spirits. So it is positive, it's for the good. Mass discarnations are aiding progress. Why? Because the spirits will learn new lessons while they're discarnated. And then new spirits and more evolved spirits and older spirits who have now learned new lessons will come to help Earth in its transformation. Furthermore, Alan Kardec says, great social crises have been followed by an era of progress. So everything that's happening right now is for progress. God is willing it this way. And we're invited to recognize God in its power and align ourselves with God. And let us see everything that's going on in light of love and light, in the light of the good. The goal is that great social crises have been followed by eras of progress. Very positive. It is one of these widespread movements that is occurring at present. And we have to chuckle, right? This was written 150 some years ago. And he's speaking to that. And one could say, during the World Wars, one could say this was exactly happening. And it's happening again, speaking to our times as well. One of these widespread movements is occurring at present, and which will usher in the reorganization of humankind. So this is in the name, for the purpose of the reorganization of humankind. The increase in the causes of destruction is a characteristic sign of the time, for they will hasten the emergence of new prototypes. Will hasten the emergence of new prototypes. How wonderful. It doesn't feel so good in the moment, but it's for the greater good. And that will hopefully help us to align ourselves with it and be a positive, supportive, happy source. For materialists, item 35, for materialists, destructive scourges are calamities without compensation, without beneficial results, since in their opinion, such calamities wipe out beings forever. This is another byproduct of being attached to materialistic thinking. And we know that that's part of the old generation. That is something that we're invited to shed, to release. And we may say, oh yeah, I know better. But there may be other aspects where we're still equally materialistic. And it is for us to meditate on that, to observe ourselves, to get to know ourselves better, to see where are we materialistic. And it might come out in just being super reactive and triggered by people and how they treat us. Why? Because at that very moment, we're forgetting that we are in front of an ailing soul, like a soul who is in an ICU. If we go to an ICU and we see somebody with broken bones and lots of, in a horrific situation, we're very respectful and tolerant, right? But we don't see it when a soul is in that state. And we all of a sudden just think about our own selves and we deserve better, right? Doesn't that happen often? Because we're still very materialistic in our outlook. If we can't see the wound, we forget it's there. So we're in a renewed way invited to observe our materialistic tendencies. For those, however, who know that death only destroys the envelope, such calamities do not carry the same consequences, and they do not cause them the least bit of fear. So we do not need to fear discarnation, death, because we know now that it's for the greater good, it's for the impetus, it's for the alignment with God's will. It is for the progress of humanity and this planet. And we know the soul continues on to live. Our souls, our spirits are immortal. We are immortal. This is, I spoke as if we have a soul. No, we are the soul. We are the spirit. We are immortal. They understand the purpose of such calamities, and they also know that people do not lose any more by dying together than by dying alone, because in one way or the other, it is always necessary to come to this end. It is always necessary. We all will discarnate. And in the gospel, we learn that Those who've completed their lessons are allowed to discarnate. It's an honor. So here we are reminded that if less people die, just one by one, like popcorn, just kind of starting to pop, there's no difference from when people die together in large amounts. But the result is different. Disbelievers will laugh at these things and will treat them as chimeras. However, say what they may, they will not escape the common law. They will fall in their turn just like everyone else. And then what will become of them? They say nothing. But they will continue to live on in spite of themselves and will someday be forced to open their eyes. Law of cause and effect. All God's laws will take care of it with love and mercy. Justice and love will help us all to transform, all of us. And we don't need to force it on them. That's our job, to work on our own inner transformation. Dear friends, this concludes our study of, here we are. This concludes our study of Genesis. This was a beautiful journey that we embarked on, thanks to Alan Kardec in helping us understand what miracles are and what they're not, and helping us to understand that the time has come, the predictions, and how we can align ourselves with progress. And again, we did not read every single word of these chapters, but to go over them and study them and meditate on them is highly recommended, so that we can become part of the new, that we can help progress and not hinder it. We don't want to be stragglers, we assume. So, dear friends, thank you so much for joining Mark, Carlos, and Nora Brazil, and Lisa Tellis, and there's a few others, but I don't get any comments. Mark is saying exceptional journey through Genesis. Thank you, Sunshine. Yes, thank you, Alan Kardec and the good spirits for guiding us through this. It really is exceptional, and it is so helpful to get the bigger picture, to lift the veil a little bit and look behind it and see, oh wow, this is what actually is behind all of this. It's so helpful, right? So we can release our fears, our worries, our resistance, and we can align ourselves with the good, with progress. Seeing God as our willpower to align with, and Jesus as our guide and model in this progress. And there's Linda. Thank you, dear Linda, for joining. Thank you, dear friends. Nora, thank you, dear friend. Beautiful study. Thank you so much for being here. Much love to you. Many blessings. Good night.